Joseph Zawinul was born in 1932, and he grew up in a village in the Vienna woods. His music still draws on his memories of Austria.
Grandfather, when I was about 6 years old, he bought me a little violin, you know, and it didn't take me. And then he bought me an accordion, and I started learning the accordion for about a year, and I played for a few years just by ear. And what happened, when I learned my first music was being with the family, and they're singing. My grandfather made the schnapps, slivovitz, for the whole village. And whenever there was a bigger gathering of people, I played and everyone was singing. So I learned a lot of folk music, repertoire. It was great fun. Then later on, I got a scholarship to go to the conservatory. And that's where I started learning how to play the piano.
In Vienna, Zawinul developed into one of the Conservatoire's star pupils. But while he was still studying there, he encountered jazz and was immediately drawn to it.
There was a guy, he played the piano, and he played something, I never heard even the name, jazz. But there was something about the name jazz, and I was kind of ego-tripping on this. You know, I said J-A-Z-Z. Somehow I saw my name in there. You know, I mean, that was my first, and I liked this word. Then the movies came into Vienna. You know, the American movies.
I don't stay out late, got no place to go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Hey, misbehaving, saving my love for you.
I saw Stormy Weather 24 times. Turned me totally around. Wanted to play with black musicians, you know. That was kind of my dream. I arrived very early in the morning in New York, and it was kind of rainy. And it just knocked me out.
Zawinul's first stop in New York was a jazz club, whose fame had reached him in Austria. Birdland was the most dynamic club in Manhattan, home of the style known as bebop, and the haunt of all the best jazz musicians.
And then when I arrived in January 1959, I went down there the very first day, the very first night I arrived. And it knocked me out because people I was knowing about just from their music, and they were all there. Duke Ellington and Miles Davis were standing there, and great people from the theater. It was unbelievable the way people came there, you know, and it's very hard to describe what Birdland really meant. I met Wayne, I was only about 2 weeks in this country, on 52nd Street, on the corner of where Birdland was located. And we were immediately communicating.
Newark, where I grew up, my neighborhood was a conglomeration of Italians, black, Irish, Polish, and Jewish, you know, like crossing the cultures. Most everyone was square in Newark, New Jersey. When I heard about bebop, and no one turned their head in that direction except maybe myself and about 3 other people in the high school. And they had the sax battles with the Jimmy Lunsford band. 2 saxophone players, they would come up and do it. But the lights from the theater, you know, the lighting, and the horn looked like sparkling, you know, like stars in the sky, you know. It made the men look bigger than what they really were, too, because I was only still 16.
What was it about the sax that made you want to play it?
It was shiny. It looked shiny, you know. Even Eddie Lockjaw Davis told me the same thing. He said that he was about 15 years old, and he said, I bet you and I have the same reason for picking up the saxophone. He was staying at the bar in Birdland. We were talking years later. I said, what's the reason? What's your reason? He said, because it's shiny.
From the moment they met, Zawinul and Shorter wanted to play together, but as 2 junior sidemen, it was impossible to form their own band. They did both play for Maynard Ferguson in 1959, but Shorter was quickly poached by Art Blakey, a drummer whose group, the Jazz Messengers, has always been a forcing ground for the most gifted young musicians.
When I first started really playing with the Messengers, I'd get calls from the audience, like, go ahead and play, young Coltrane, and something. And Art, he's playing the drum, he's still playing the beat, and we'd hear this play, young Coltrane thing, you know, shouting at me, and Art would say to me, you got your work cut out for you, you know. He said, you got to get past all those guys. Get past who? He said, get past Sonny Rollins, John Cole. You got to get past John. But he was joking with me. He said, I was only joking. You got to get your own style.
It's astonishing in his early days, you know, what a hard bop sax player Wayne Shorter was. Of course, by the time he came along, the bebop revolution had happened in jazz. They'd begun to improvise on harmonies instead of on melodies, and they changed the beat too, so it was all bebop, bebop, bebop. That's how it got its name. And at the time, the great bop sax hero was John Coltrane. So it's rather natural that Wayne Shorter should attempt in some ways to emulate him. People even began to call him the new John Coltrane. And so in the early days when you hear him, he's much more interested in the patterns of what he's playing, very quick, very hard, very aggressive, rather than in the tone. But when he inherited, as he did, the mantle of John Coltrane in the 1960s and began to play with Miles Davis and the great quintets, sextets of those days, he learned how to play soft and sexy as well as hard and bubbly, and I guess he became the greatest bop sax player of the 1960s.
Well, the horn, to me, it's almost like Excalibur, the singing sword. When it was wielded, it had a singing something. I feel like a knight with this horn. The good horn has a kind of a history from the day this horn was came out of the mold or out of the workman's hands. The history means to me its own karma, how they say in certain philosophy, the karma. The horn has its karma, or its destiny to be with me. When you play faster notes, it still has that. It's what do you call it? Fuel tank full of expressive. It's the fuel for expression. Tank full. And there's some air. You hear it's like air along the sides. It's like the. I think of like a carrot. When you look at the carrot, you cut it and you look at top view. You see the green part in the middle of the carrot, and then the orange part around it. The green part is like to me, like the tone, the actual the nucleus of the tone, and the orange part is like a little air around the edges.
Zawinul too was building a considerable reputation as a pianist with Cannonball Adderley.
I always preferred an accordion, as a matter of fact, and it became to me in the '60s, in the early '60s, when the electric pianos came out. I heard Ray Charles is the first guy who played a Wurlitzer piano, which I later on used for recording with Cannonball Adderley, "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy," because of an inspiration I always had in my life to play more of a accordion-like sounding instrument.
While he was playing with Cannonball Adderley, Zawinul also began to emerge as a composer. He wrote "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy," which was Adderley's biggest hit, and won a coveted Grammy Award in 1967.
And it was just a natural development, and then later on, when the synthesizers were invented, that was a lifesaver for me.
Zawinul got the chance to experiment more with synthesizers when he met up again with Wayne Shorter in Miles Davis' great band of 1969. At that time, Davis was gathering a number of the most talented young musicians around him, men like John McLaughlin, Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams and Chick Corea. Together, they were forging a completely new kind of electronic jazz.
In the 50s, Miles had helped to make one revolution, and in the 1960s, Miles Davis was to make another. To oversimplify, what happened is that jazz musicians began hearing rock, and rock musicians began hearing jazz. And Miles Davis pulled it together in a fusion which was crucial and which would fundamentally change the course of both jazz and, for that matter, popular music generally. He picked brilliant musicians, and I suppose that the two most important were undoubtedly Joe Zawinul and Wayne Shorter. And what they did was to create a new music, first of all with Miles, and then even more expansively in the 1970s with Weather Report. And they made a music which you can call jazz rock, but which is really just modern music. Great modern music beyond category, and in my view, beyond price.
We were getting into 1970, into the 70s, and we knew there was a hell of a change happening, and that we would be somehow responsible for it.
During the 70s, Weather Report increasingly dominated modern jazz. Though Zawinul and Shorter were constantly changing the other members of the band, over the years they created a completely individual and distinctive sound. By the end of the 70s, Weather Report was firmly established as the preeminent jazz band in the world. At the Playboy Jazz Festival, held each year at the Hollywood Bowl and one of the biggest events in the jazz calendar, they were regularly topping the bill over the likes of Art Blakey, Dizzy Gillespie and Count Basie. At that time, their lineup included Peter Erskine on drums and Jaco Pastorius on bass.
We always had a good band, and it always changes. If someone either cannot do it or wants to do something else, then we change. But it seems like this one is pretty steady.
Victor Bailey on the bass.
We're younger. We grew up with the last Weather Report, so our train of thought is sort of starting there and going elsewhere.
Omar Hakim on the drums.
So Joe called me, and we talked on the phone for about 15 minutes, and he hired me on the phone. We'd never met or anything. He just hired me.
Jose Rossy, percussionist.
I got a call from Omar to join, that Joe wanted me to join the band. We thought he never met me, never, And it was my favorite band in the world. I always listen to Weather Report. It's a dream. It's you gotta be kidding.
Joe Zawinul, keyboard.
It is not such a flamboyant band, maybe like the one we had before, but they playing the compositions are really being played very correctly, interpreted correctly.
My name is Wayne Shorter. Thank you.
I called a friend of mine in New York, and he told me that this guy, Omar Hakim, was the greatest drummer in New York So just... This is just a communication thing. You always need one guy. Wayne and me, we don't have to look at each other. This is just a matter of magic, you know, whatever you call it, or just being able to hear very well. And and Omar is right in my line over there, and it's great. We can communicate very, very good together, like that.
Joe gives a lot of cues, and so what I do is I keep a close eye on him so that I could see what keyboard he's going to play. You know, maybe I can watch his fingers. I can just about predict certain things that he's going to do.
It's his band. It's his concept. So I have to learn to play, do what I have in my background into his concept. Which is, like, I mean, it's hard to know. It's not that it's hard, but he demands a lot. He looks at you and says, like, do this, do that, because he knows you can do it. So he brings it out. And when it happens, you go like, he was right, I can do that.
I think it's the most creative and the most original band. I mean, it's an assimilation of so many different things. There's some bands, say some rock bands, where it's really original, but it's still working within that framework of rock or funk or whatever. But this band, to me, it's hard to say what it's drawn from. The music is drawn from so many different things. American music, Black American music, European music, Indian, everything is in there. But without saying, okay, this song is an Indian song, or this song is, it's incredible.
Compose is by improvising, and I improvise, put it on tape, and then if I like it, I just take it and write it down for the band. Often I have long scores, 17, 18 pages full of music. I want to avoid in my music to think so much about it. I hardly ever do. But when it's there, you always hear it, you know. You hear it when you do it. But if you think about it, oh, it's gone. You cannot do that. You got to be able to concentrate on what you're doing so strongly that you never will be interrupted by anything. And just go. And then it will be a whole composition, a whole song form, like a symphony, let's say. And that's possible with one thought, without never letting it go, just to work and do work. But not thinking, just concentrating. After the improvisation, I usually put the tape away unless I immediately know that's the piece we're going to be using. And then just work on it, write it down note for note. Well, it will change to a point, but not very much. Most of my pieces, I'm totally stubborn about it because I don't want to change the inspiration, because I believe it's given to you, you ought to respect it.
Just a little slower. All right. Good. You can tell us.
What I try to do is to get as close to the original idea with the interpretation. Like in this case here, Wayne plays the same thing I am playing.
That's the way it starts. I'm playing that, and Joe is playing that same note for note, the same segment that I played just then. But he has another sound. It's hard for me I cannot even demonstrate the sound that he has. But with the soprano and the sound that he has, it's going to sound very far, like a land, somewhere where there are thin cymbals and gongs and Singapore-ish and a lot of water and palm trees and in another time.
It was about 2.5 minutes long, the improvisation. So in order to play it on stage, we just added a middle part, which you will hear also, which we play every night, differently. Taking our freedom there, but it always goes back to, and then was very young, I always tried to have an orchestral sound, like symphony orchestras and so on. And by having the synthesizer, I grew up with music like. So for me to play this Mikano music, for instance, I would have had to have maybe 20 violin players or French horn players or whatever have you. And the inventors of these instruments in coordination with the artists have allowed all of us who play this kind of music or whatever, allowed us to be able to play whatever you can hear. And that's the whole purpose of it. And that's also the development, let's say, of the music I am playing or making.
First, I suppose, they've developed jazz rock into a music of much more magnificence than anyone else. More textures, more adventure, more flights of fancy, everything. They simply make sounds like no one else does. And I guess that in that, the synthesizer is the key. Joe Zawinul has taken the synthesizer, in my view, to the uttermost of its limits. As a composer, too, he's tremendous, over 200 pieces to his credit. And Wayne Shorter, he composes, too. Wayne Shorter's very interesting because he's become from just being a great sax player into being a great musician. And most of all, improvisation. Now that's the core of jazz, the thing that's supposed to make it different. And the way that they take off like a rocket from a platform into improvisations, different every night, and then know when to come back to the scored, intricate passages is magic to me. I simply don't know how they do it. And at the end of the day, I guess that if Duke Ellington, for me, is the 1930s and 1940s, and Miles Davis and Charlie Parker the 50s, and the Beatles the 60s, then in the 70s and 80s, I can't think of anyone I'd place higher in terms of musical achievement than Weather Report. They are tremendous.
Well, let's see. In the 60s, I would have, say, with an acoustic band with the piano and the horn, the saxophone would have had to play all of the melodies of a certain piece of music, of a composition, and then solo too. See, I would have had to be what you call total front line. The horns were the front line. So I would have had that kind of 60s sound, like trumpet, tenor, and then rhythm section. But with Weather Report, you have the rhythm section, and Joe and I are, say, basically the front line, but the compositions may unfold so that the rhythm section carry melodic content, and at some point we're able to switch and become the rhythm ourselves, or just an integral part of the lace work.
lot of bands, you have a part and you just play that part, whereas with this band you have freedom, but there's a way that you have to relate to the other musicians so that we can all become one, but be individuals. Their motto is we always solo and we never solo.
75% of the music is improvised, and the other 25% is, song forms and melody. But every night solos are different. Sometimes even the song forms change. One cue from Joe might change the form of the song.
And with this band, we try to make it like a basketball game. Pass the ball around. You play, you have your chance, and you give somebody else some room.
What it does, it makes me try to fit another expressive musical expression idea into another shape, an opening which has a different shape. And I don't know what that shape is, because it's simultaneously I'm going through a tunnel and I have to watch out for what do you call it, stagnites? What do you call them,
Stalactites.
Stalactites and all that stuff. The ones that come from the top and the ones that go up the bottom. Every time you take a step, it's a dare. So you're getting you feel like a daredevil. But you come out breathing, you come out alive. When you feel that you've reached something emotionally, it has no name, you kind of welled up inside, and when you're in the middle of it playing, it's there. And then it demands that you reach further.
We're very conscious of space and silence just as much as we're conscious of how many notes we're giving. Joe might play a couple of notes that might inspire me to do something that I wouldn't have done if I didn't hear those 3 notes. Or Victor might turn around and give me a look, and I know that look means I'm about to take off, so come on, here we go.
You cannot make the whole thing. You got to play with other people. You got to interchange thinking, and you need a rhythm section. You need another soloist. I could play alone. I could go on the road and play alone with a bunch of keyboards, play all kinds, but I wouldn't want to do that. I like to play with people who can play. It's like a sport. You have a little team and you play together and make music.